On Monday, Trump told a group of farmers Deere could face major tariffs if the company outsources jobs to Mexico.
Imagine America, where the familiar symbols of reliability and strength are beginning to crumble before our eyes. Factories that have fed entire cities for decades are closing down. Workers who have given the company the best years of their lives are left out on the street. Farmers who are used to relying on reliable equipment suddenly find themselves in a situation where it is simply impossible to upgrade their equipment. This is not fantasy, it is reality, unfolding right now. And at the center of this drama is one of the most recognizable brands in American industry, John Deere.
John Deere has directed questions about the announcement to a page on its website with the title, John Deere's Commitment to U.S. Manufacturing.
The company that for nearly 2 centuries has epitomized American land, agriculture, and labor is moving its production to Mexico, costing the United States thousands of jobs. More than 1,800 people have lost their jobs in recent months alone. And that's only part of the picture. Closed factories are not just empty workshops. They are bankrupt stores in small towns. They are empty restaurants where workers used to have lunch. They are families who are forced to seek food assistance for the first time in their lives.
Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump attended a campaign event in Pennsylvania Monday night, a roundtable where farmers and manufacturers expressed their concerns.
Why is this happening? There are several reasons. The company's sales have plummeted by almost a fifth, the worst result in a decade. High interest rates have made loans unaffordable for farmers, and grain and soybean prices unpredictable. John Deere's warehouses are overflowing with unsold equipment. But the decisive factor has been trade wars. The tariffs on steel and aluminum introduced by Donald Trump's administration, instead of protecting American industry, have led to increased costs. In just one quarter, the company lost about $100 million on tariffs. And in order to survive, it decided to move production to where the cost price is lower.
I just noticed behind me John Deere tractors. I know a lot about John Deere. I love the company. But as you know, they've announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now.
But that's not the end of the story. Trump responded immediately and harshly, 200% tariffs on any John Deere equipment manufactured outside the US. His message is clear. America will not allow jobs to be moved overseas. But will this move save the day or only exacerbate the crisis?
We contacted John Deere, who did not have a direct comment on Trump's decision for the 200% tariff, but they reiterated their over $2 billion mission.
Meanwhile, life is turning upside down in small towns in Iowa and Illinois. Stores are closing, banks are seeing an increase in loan defaults, and farmers are forced to repair old combines that are more than 10 years old because new ones are too expensive or completely unavailable. Against this backdrop, demand for used equipment is soaring, and waiting lists for spare parts are stretching into months. The company promises to invest $20 billion in American factories over the next 10 years. But people are asking a fair question. What difference will that make today when their families are left without income? Politicians accuse the corporation of betrayal, while economists argue, will tariffs save workers or destroy even more manufacturing? This is not just a story about tractors. It is a story about the future of the American economy, about whether the country can protect its industry in an era of global markets and trade wars. Will the brand that symbolized American soil remain truly American? Or is this the beginning of the end of an era when the words made in the USA still meant something?
Just back in June, John Deere announced that they were relocating specific production lines to facilities in Mexico. Now, Donald Trump disagreed with this decision and left a significant threat that would ultimately affect the company's bottom line.
The answers to these questions will determine not only the fate of John Deere, they will determine the fate of millions of Americans and the future of Made in America. The crisis surrounding John Deere did not begin yesterday, but it is in recent months that it has become particularly noticeable throughout America. Thousands of jobs are disappearing, and behind every number is a real human destiny. A company that until recently was considered a symbol of American power and agricultural stability is unexpectedly changing course, moving production to Mexico. More than 1,800 workers have lost their jobs, and that's just the official data. Beyond the statistics are dozens of contractors and suppliers who have also been hit hard. In some cities where John Deere factories were the main employers, up to 40% of jobs were linked to the company. Now these cities seem to have been decapitated. In a tomb where the closure of the factory came as a real shock, the streets began to empty in just a few weeks. Cafes that used to thrive on workers' lunches and breakfasts are now losing customers and closing one after another. The owner of a small snack bar said that his revenue had fallen threefold and he was forced to lay off waiters. Banks are seeing an increase in overdue mortgage loans, and stores are seeing more shoppers paying for food with Bain Farm. The picture is complemented by statistics from United Way, where the number of requests for assistance has increased by 40%.
To see if Trump's promise comes to fruition. We contacted Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris's campaign and Congressman Eric Sorensen for their responses on the 200% tariff.
But the real drama unfolded not only on the streets of small towns. Inside the company, employees said they had never seen such a level of discontent and uncertainty. Workers who had tied their lives to John Deere for decades talk of betrayal. One former employee, who worked at the plant for 32 years, claims that he learned about his dismissal from a newsletter before he received an official letter from the company. There are many such stories, and each of them is a small piece of the picture of a global problem. It is important to remember that this is the first major crisis of this magnitude in decades. The last major strike at the company's plants was more than 30 years ago, and it ended in victory for the workers, who managed to defend their conditions. Today, the situation looks much bleaker. Workers understand that competition with Mexican factories, where wages are 3 times lower, is virtually hopeless. According to some estimates, the company saves about $70 million a year on labor costs, alone by moving part of its production capacity abroad. At the same time, the losses for the United States itself are even more impressive. According to an internal report by one of the analytical agencies, in Iowa and Illinois alone, the economic impact of the job cuts at John Deere could reach $500 million over the next 2 years. This includes not only direct job losses, but also indirect ones: a reduction in small business income, a drop in tax revenues to local budgets, and an increase in the social burden on states. In this context, the question arises, how did a company that has always been associated with American soil find itself in a situation where the future of national interests is threatened? The answer lies in a combination of economic and political factors. John Deere is indeed experiencing market pressure. Sales of agricultural equipment fell 18% in the second quarter of 2025, the worst result in a decade. High interest rates made it impossible for farmers to upgrade their equipment, and corn and soybean prices fell, forcing many farmers to postpone major purchases.
If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States, so that if I win, John Deere is going to be paying a 200%.
But this part of the story is only half the truth. Behind the scenes, experts say the company was preparing to relocate production several years ago. Back in 2022, a subsidiary was registered in Mexico, which quietly bought up land near major transport hubs. At the time, few people talked about it, but today it is clear that the relocation of production was not so much a forced move as a cost optimization strategy. For small American towns, this strategy is proving disastrous. Studies show that the closure of a single large factory leads to an average 15% reduction in the number of small businesses within a 10-mile radius. In Ottumwa, 3 auto parts stores, one of the oldest pharmacies, and even the sports club that was the pride of the town have already closed. It looks like a chain reaction. Wages disappear, demand disappears, businesses close. Another important element of this story is the symbolism of the John Deere rebrand. For American farmers and residents of the Midwest, this company has always been more than just a manufacturer of equipment. Its green and yellow machines have become part of the cultural code, a symbol of reliability and durability. The loss of this symbol is perceived as a personal betrayal. On social media, you can find dozens of posts from farmers who write that they will never buy the company's products again, even if they have to overpay for similar products. And although it is difficult to say how widespread this boycott will be, the very fact of its existence speaks to the depth of the crisis of confidence. The situation is further complicated by the political backdrop. Donald Trump, who has made the protection of American workers one of his key themes, reacted sharply to the relocation of production. His threat to impose 200% tariffs on equipment manufactured abroad sent a loud signal to the company and the entire market. But experts doubt that this decision will bring any real benefits. Higher tariffs could lead to higher prices for equipment within the US, which would only exacerbate the problems faced by farmers.
We're still waiting on those responses, and John Deere themselves say that they have no more additional information on the situation. And this all comes after the company laid off 801 employees in Illinois and 1,599.
Looking at the bigger picture, this story is not just a matter of one company's business. It reflects a trend in which national symbols are powerless in the face of the global economy. And while John Deere explains its actions as a concern for competitiveness, small American towns are experiencing the destruction of their economic base. These two processes exist in parallel, but their intersection is giving rise to a crisis of confidence, the scale of which is only beginning to emerge. The second aspect of this drama is related to the history of the brand itself. John Deere has always embodied American strength in agriculture. Its equipment worked in the fields of Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas, helping to feed the country and strengthen national pride. But today, that image is under threat. The 185-year-old company is abandoning its main role, being part of the American heart. John Deere has faced difficulties in the past, but it has always found a way out. During the Great Depression, the company was the first to offer farmers installment plans saving their farms. In the 1980s, when the agricultural crisis devastated thousands of farms, John Deere factories became a symbol of resilience and hope. But the current crisis is different. It stems not only from economic difficulties, but also from political uncertainty, global supply chains, and trade wars. That is why the public reaction is so acute today. Americans see not just the loss of jobs, but the collapse of a symbol. When Senator Chuck Grassley called the company's decision a betrayal of taxpayers, his words resonated with thousands of people. After all, it's not just about the subsidies and tax breaks the company received, but also about the trust that has been the foundation of its reputation for decades. In small towns in the Midwest, more and more residents are asking themselves, what next? If even brands like John Deere are leaving, what will remain? Alarming predictions are already looming on the horizon. In the coming years, American industry may face a wave of outsourcing, with dozens more companies following Deere's example. And if that happens, the consequences for the economy will be far more devastating than today's figures. Thus, the first and second points of this story, the beginning of the crisis, and its historical context reveal not only the essence of the problem, but also its scale. This is not just an economic move by a corporation. It is a sign that old symbols are no longer working in the new reality. America is on the verge of change, and the question is whether it will be able to preserve its industrial identity or give in to the global race for cheapness. Once profitable divisions, especially those related to construction and logging equipment, were in the red. Every bulldozer cab and every logging machine component made from imported steel cost tens of % more. And while the company had previously been able to maintain its margins, now every machine was becoming unprofitable. Workers in Iowa and Illinois saw workshops shut down not because of a lack of orders, but because production had become economically unviable. Metal deliveries were delayed, component prices fluctuated, and engineers were forced to literally redesign new projects to circumvent tariff restrictions. One engineer admitted in a leak to the press, "We are basically reinventing tractors just so we don't have to pay 3 times as much for every part." Added to this were problems with warehouse stocks. In mid-2025, the company's warehouses were overflowing with unsold machines. Farmers, accustomed to upgrading their equipment every few years, simply stopped placing orders as corn and soybean prices fell. According to USDA estimates, by August 2025, 61% of farmers were using equipment that was more than 10 years old. A new tractor was now compared to buying a house. Its cost had become so prohibitive, Deere was forced to cut production to avoid exacerbating the oversupply of equipment. Under these circumstances, the company's decision to move part of its production to Mexico seemed logical to management. Labor is cheaper there, taxes are lower, and access to raw materials is easier. But for America, this was a challenge, especially since the company received millions in tax breaks precisely for keeping jobs in the country. Senator Chuck Grassley called it a betrayal of taxpayers, and local mayors said that closed factories were a fatal blow to their cities. This is where politics came into play. Donald Trump, who made the protection of American workers a key part of his rhetoric, reacted immediately. His announcement of 200% tariffs on equipment manufactured abroad sounded like a thunderclap. At rallies in Ohio and Michigan, he promised that America would not allow jobs to be taken away. If Deere thinks it can manufacture in Mexico and sell here, they are wrong, he said. These words drew thunderous applause from his supporters, but caused alarm on Wall Street. Investors understood that 200% tariffs would mean higher prices, which would lead to an even greater decline in demand. In Iowa, the reaction of politicians was no less sharp. The local parliament began considering a bill that would require companies that cut jobs to return tax breaks to the state budget. Governor Kim Reynolds stated outright that the company's departure from Iowa was unacceptable, given its historical role in the region. Lawmakers even proposed extreme measures, including banning John Deere from participating in state tenders if the company continued to relocate its production. However, the company insisted that this was not a matter of politics but of economics. Deere representatives claimed that it was solely a question of global competitiveness. But to ordinary people, these words sounded like mockery. Workers who had lost their jobs after decades of service saw only the closed doors of the factory and the empty streets of their towns. Against the backdrop of this confrontation, the situation turned into political theater. For Trump, the crisis with Deere became a convenient platform to strengthen his position. He could show that he was fighting for workers, that his tariff policy was a shield for American industry. But economists warned that this shield was more like a club. Instead of protecting, it makes products more expensive and companies more vulnerable. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, since the introduction of steel tariffs, employment in the steel industry has grown by only 2%, while equipment manufacturers, including Deere and Caterpillar, have lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Political pressure was mounting. Congress discussed the possibility of introducing federal legislation that would require companies receiving government subsidies to keep jobs in the United States. But legal experts doubted the feasibility of such measures. Global corporations will always find loopholes to move production to where it is more profitable. Against the backdrop of these discussions, the mood in society became increasingly tense. In small towns in the Midwest, residents gathered for rallies outside closed factories, demanding the return of jobs. Posters with the words "Made in the USA" became a symbol of resistance. But the louder the slogans sounded, the clearer it became that it would be difficult to return to the past. The economic causes of the crisis are intertwined with the political response, creating a vicious circle. High tariffs were supposed to protect workers, but they made production more expensive. Companies are moving to Mexico to survive, and politicians are responding with new threats and measures that raise prices again. As a result, the same farmers and workers for whom all these steps were supposedly introduced are suffering. The story of John Deere today is more than just the crisis of one company. It is a mirror of the entire American industrial policy. It is a question of whether a country can truly protect its jobs in a global economy without tearing apart its own market. And while politicians and corporations trade accusations, small towns lose hope, farmers repair old tractors, and investors watch the stock market fall with concern. The social and agricultural consequences of the crisis caused by John Deere's actions turned out to be much deeper than just statistics on job losses. The loss of more than 1,800 jobs is not just a dry figure, it is a whole chain of ruined lives. In small towns across the Midwest, the layoffs have been the catalyst for a crisis that has spread like wildfire. Stores are closing one after another, restaurants are losing customers, and tenants are leaving their apartments en masse, unable to pay their bills. Iowa has seen a sharp increase in requests for food assistance, and in some areas, local banks have reported a 25% increase in mortgage defaults in just 3 months. Farmers, who are John Deere's main customers, have been particularly hard hit. High interest rates have made it impossible to upgrade equipment. In the past, buying a new tractor was a planned event. Every 5 to 6 years, a farm could afford to renew its fleet. Now, new equipment costs more than the average American home, and farmers are forced to squeeze every last drop of life out of their life. USDA reports have already noted that more than 60% of farmers use equipment that is over 10 years old. But behind this lie far more alarming details. According to dealers, demand for used tractors has grown by 30%, causing a real shortage. Spare parts have to be waited for months, and sometimes even longer. In Kansas, a farmer lost a third of his harvest because a part-face combine harvester was stuck on a ship and arrived too late. These stories are multiplying. Resellers have appeared on the market, buying up old combine harvesters and reselling them at inflated prices. Prices for used equipment have risen by 40%, and farmers who are used to buying machines at auctions at affordable prices are now forced to pay amounts comparable to new ones, but receive equipment with worn-out engines. Even John Deere service centers are overwhelmed. The wait for repairs stretches into months. As a result, agriculture is on the verge of a technological setback, with farmers using outdated equipment, which directly affects crop yields